The Hall of Galactic Records was designed to feel eternal. Its walls were carved from a pale stone mined on a world whose mountains were older than most civilizations in the Conclave. The pillars rose so high that their tops disappeared into the dim gold haze near the ceiling. Between them stretched endless rows of archive terminals and data vaults containing the collected history of 17 intelligent species. Every treaty, every war, every discovery. If something had happened in the galaxy, the hall was supposed to remember it. At least that was what the plaques near the entrance promised. The lower archive levels were quieter. Few people came down there unless they had been assigned to something dull, something that required patience rather than importance. The lights were dimmer, the corridors narrower, the air cooler and dry to protect ancient storage drives that had been sitting undisturbed for centuries. Archivist Trail did not mind the quiet. He was young for a Vethari, barely 20 standard cycles into his professional career, and junior archivists rarely received glamorous assignments. Most days he cataloged trade agreements, maintenance logs, and routine diplomatic filings that had accumulated faster than anyone bothered to sort them. It was slow work, but it was honest work. And sometimes slow work uncovered strange things. Trail sat alone at a terminal in Subarchive Corridor 6B when he noticed the anomaly. At first it looked like nothing more than a formatting error. A data folder inside the trade archives had a timestamp that did not belong there. The file was listed under Expired Tariff Agreements, Outer Systems. That category usually contained documents so boring that even historians avoided them. But the timestamp was wrong. By almost 70 years. Trail frowned slightly and tapped the console to open the folder. Inside were exactly 3 documents. 2 were normal trade permits from decades ago. The third had no title. That alone was unusual. Conclave archival protocol required everything to have a label. He opened it. The file expanded across the screen in a block of preserved transmission data. For a moment Trail assumed it must be some kind of technical log accidentally placed in the wrong folder. But as his eyes moved across the first few lines, the shape of the document became clear. It was a distress transmission. A very old one. He read the header again. Then again. The sender identification field was still intact. USV Meridian Star. Vanguard Exploration Armada. Flag Group 3. Trail sat back slowly. That name was not obscure. Every species in the Conclave knew it. 73 years earlier, humanity had launched the largest exploration fleet in recorded history. Over 200 ships had vanished during a mission beyond the region known as the Kadesh Veil. The Conclave had declared it a tragic accident, a spatial anomaly, an unpredictable distortion field. The official reports said the entire armada had been destroyed. Trail scrolled further down the transmission. The message itself was short, but the attached metadata told a different story. The Meridian Star had not been destroyed. It had been alive. Its crew had sent repeated signals requesting assistance and navigation guidance to return to Conclave space. The messages had arrived at several relay stations along the border. And every one of them had been intercepted. Below the transmission log were internal Conclave directives. They were stamped with High Council authorization codes. Trail read the first order. Then the second. Then the third. His hands went completely still on the console. The orders were explicit. All signals originating from beyond the Kadesh Veil were to be blocked from standard relay channels. Navigation beacons in the region were to be quietly deactivated. Monitoring stations were instructed not to respond to further transmissions. The fleet had not disappeared into an accident. The fleet had been cut off. Left alone on the far side of the galaxy with no path home. Trail stared at the screen for a long time. The archive room was silent except for the quiet hum of the data vaults surrounding him. Finally he scrolled to the bottom of the file. There was one more entry attached beneath the older transmissions. This one had a timestamp. 3 days ago. Trail leaned closer. The file contained a signal capture automatically routed through the Conclave monitoring network. The system had placed it in the same buried archive folder because it matched the 70-year-old transmission signature. The message itself was only 6 words long. Trail read it once. Then again more slowly. Then a third time, just to make sure he had not misunderstood. The words were simple, but they carried the kind of weight that made his chest feel suddenly tight. "We are still here. And we remember." For a long time Trail did not move. Somewhere deep inside the archive system, the automated catalog program continued quietly sorting harmless trade documents. The galaxy outside the Hall of Records carried on as if nothing had changed. But Trail understood something now. Something the people who had buried this file had hoped would never be discovered. The fleet humanity believed lost was alive. And after 73 years in the dark beyond the veil, it was coming home. Trail locked the terminal, then unlocked it again, then locked it one more time, as if repeating the motion could somehow make the file less real. It did not. The message stayed where it was, 6 plain words at the bottom of a document that should never have existed. "We are still here. And we remember." His eyes kept returning to the council directives above it. Not because he doubted what they said, because he understood them too well. Archivists learned early that history was rarely lost by accident. Important things did not simply vanish. They were misplaced, relabeled, delayed, buried beneath administrative debris until memory itself became too tired to keep digging. That was what someone had done here. Not to a border dispute. Not to a failed trade mission. To an entire human fleet. Trail reopened the first internal directive and read it line by line. The language was formal, careful, wrapped in the polite structure Conclave officials used when they wanted cruelty to sound responsible. In the interest of long-term interspecies stability, pending risk evaluation of newly discovered strategic assets. Unauthorized return access from the Kadesh Veil region is to be suspended. He swallowed. Strategic assets. That phrase had weight. He opened the attached memorandum. This document was older and more restricted, marked with a defunct security classification. Time had not erased its meaning. The lost Vanguard had discovered something beyond the veil. Not merely habitable systems. Not merely resources. Ancient infrastructure. The memo called them precursor forges, automated megastructures left behind by a civilization so old that its real name had vanished long before the first living empire began keeping records. The forges were still functioning, capable of manufacturing ships, weapons, and materials beyond anything the modern conclave could build. Trail sat very still. Now the betrayal made sense. Or rather, it became legible. The Council had not silenced the fleet because the region was dangerous. They had silenced it because humanity had reached something too powerful too quickly. He kept reading. The justification section was the worst part. It was not emotional. It was not hateful. It was colder than that, an argument written by people who believed themselves rational. Humanity, the document said, had demonstrated a pattern of accelerated adaptation, unconventional problem-solving, and unstable emotional intensities under pressure. In the short time since joining the Conclave, humans had already shown an alarming tendency to solve problems established powers had learned to live around. They learned too fast, worked too hard, refused limits too easily. And if a species like that gained access to unlimited industrial capacity through precursor systems, the balance of power that held the Conclave together might become uncertain. Uncertain. Trail almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. 17 species had built a political order around the idea that power should move slowly, carefully, predictably, always through existing hands. Humans were none of those things. So the Council had decided not to let them return. Not publicly. Not through debate. Not with a vote anyone outside the chamber would ever read. Just a few signatures. A few orders. A few relays shut down. A few beacons destroyed. And 400,000 living people quietly converted into a memorial. Trail opened a supplemental archive attached to the main file. Public statements. He should not have, but he did. Tribute addresses. Council condolences. Human memorial notices. He read one speech delivered 50 years ago by a council representative standing before grieving families on Earth. The speaker had described the Vanguard as brave explorers lost to the unknowable violence of the frontier, had promised that their sacrifice would be remembered by all civilized species. Trail's jaw tightened. They had known. When they gave those speeches, they had known. When families lit candles, the council had known. When names were carved into stone, the council had known. When human children learned the story of the lost fleet, the council had known. The lie was not only strategic, it was ceremonial, maintained year after year until it hardened into accepted truth. He scrolled to the recent transmission again. 3 days old. Strong signal. That detail mattered too. The original Vanguard had vanished with early generation drives and conventional communications systems. For a signal to return now this strong from beyond the veil meant only one thing. They had survived long enough to rebuild. Long enough to adapt. Long enough to become something the council had feared from the very beginning. Trail glanced toward the end of the corridor. Still empty. Still silent. But the archive no longer felt quiet. It felt watched, as if the weight of the buried file had changed the air around him. He thought about closing it. Putting everything back exactly as he found it. Pretending the system had glitched and that none of this belonged to him. That would be the safe thing. The reasonable thing. He was junior staff. Unknown. Replaceable. No one expected heroism from an archivist whose job was filing obsolete trade schedules. But another thought pressed harder. If the signal was real, the fleet was already moving. If the fleet was moving, the truth would not stay buried much longer. And when it surfaced, anyone who had seen it first and done nothing would belong, quietly, comfortably, to the side that had looked away. Trail stared once more at the 6-word message. Then he reached into his robe, took out a personal data sliver, and copied the entire archive set. The transfer bar filled in silence. When it was done, he removed the sliver and slipped it into his inner pocket. For the first time that night, he stood up. He still did not know exactly what he was going to do. But he knew one thing with complete certainty. This was no longer history. It was a warning. And somewhere beyond the Kadesh Veil, humanity had finally sent word that the dead were not dead at all. Trail did not go back to his quarters. If he did, he knew he might lose his nerve. Instead he walked. The archive corridors were nearly empty at that hour. Most of the station's population had shifted into its night cycle, leaving only the soft glow of maintenance lights and the quiet mechanical hum of environmental systems. His footsteps echoed faintly against the polished stone floor. The Hall of Records was enormous, but down in the lower levels it felt strangely narrow, like the inside of a tunnel that had been carved too long ago for anyone to remember why. Trail kept one hand against the inside of his robe where the data sliver rested. It felt heavier than it should have. Not physically. Historically. He reached the main lift column and paused. There were only a few people in the galaxy who should see what he had found. And only one of them was close enough to reach tonight. The human delegation. The lift doors opened silently. Trail stepped inside and selected an upper station level. As the chamber rose through the spine of the structure, the walls shifted from archive stone to diplomatic marble, and the lighting grew warmer. By the time the doors opened again, he had entered an entirely different world. The Conclave's diplomatic ring was designed to look welcoming. Tall windows overlooked the stars beyond the station's orbit. Gardens grew beneath carefully tuned sunlight panels. Delegates from dozens of species passed each other in quiet conversations about trade routes and shipping quotas and agricultural exchanges. All the small, peaceful negotiations that kept 17 civilizations moving in roughly the same direction. Trail wondered how many of them knew what had really happened 73 years ago. Probably none. That was the point of a well-buried lie. He followed the corridor signs toward the human embassy suite. It was late, but the lights were still on. Humans were known for strange sleep cycles. He reached the door and hesitated. For a moment he imagined the possible futures waiting on the other side of this decision. If the message was wrong, if the signal was a mistake, if the fleet beyond the veil was gone after all, then he was about to cause a diplomatic crisis over a ghost. But the words from the transmission would not leave his mind. "We are still here. And we remember." That did not sound like a ghost. It sounded like patience. Trail raised his hand and pressed the call panel. The door opened a moment later. The human who stood there was tall, with close-cut gray hair and the calm expression of someone who had spent a long time practicing not reacting too quickly to surprises. Director Mara Oae, senior human ambassador to the Conclave. She studied him for a moment. Then her eyes shifted slightly to the tension in his posture and the way his hand rested protectively over the inside pocket of his robe. Something in her expression changed. "Archivist," she said quietly. Trail nodded. "I found something in the lower records," he said. Mara stepped aside without asking another question. "Come in." He entered the office. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Trail removed the data sliver and placed it on the desk between them. Neither of them spoke while Mara inserted it into her console. The room filled with the faint glow of the archive file unfolding across the screen. Transmission logs. Council directives. Internal memoranda. The buried history of the Vanguard Armada. Mara read everything. Slowly. Carefully. When she reached the final entry, the signal received 3 days ago, she stopped moving entirely. Her eyes remained on the screen for a long moment. Then she leaned back slightly in her chair. Outside the window behind her, the pale light of the system's star drifted across the station. Finally she spoke. Her voice was very calm. "They're alive." Trail nodded. "Yes." Mara's gaze returned to the 6 words at the bottom of the file. She read them once more. This time she did not hide the change in her expression. It was not shock. Not fear. Something deeper. Recognition. "They found the way back," she said quietly. Then she looked at Trail. "And the Conclave has 14 days before the fleet that it abandoned in the dark arrives at its front door." She closed the file. For the first time that night, the silence between them felt like the calm before a storm. The emergency council session began at 2:17 station time. There was no official announcement. No entry on the public schedule. The summons traveled instead through private channels. Encrypted signals sent directly to the residences of the 17 ruling speakers of the Conclave. Each message carried the same priority code, one reserved for situations that threatened the stability of the entire interstellar order. Within 40 minutes, the chamber beneath the Grand Hall began to fill. Unlike the towering assembly hall above it, this room was small, windowless, and deliberately unremarkable. The stone walls were bare. The table in the center was circular and smooth, built for conversation rather than ceremony. It was the place where decisions were made that no one outside the council was meant to see. Speaker Vorin arrived last. He moved slowly, leaning slightly on the polished wood of his walking staff. The Dravith species lived longer than most of the Conclave's member civilizations, and Vorin had served on the council longer than nearly anyone alive. He was also the last surviving signatory of the order issued 73 years ago, the one that had sealed the fate of the Vanguard Armada. The door closed behind him with a quiet metallic seal. No one spoke until the room's security systems confirmed that all external communication channels had been cut. Only then did the council's chief monitoring officer step forward. Aurelius was small for a Vethari, his narrow shoulders hunched beneath the weight of the data tablet he carried. He activated the projection field. A star map expanded above the table. The Kadesh Veil appeared as a long smear of distorted space along the outer rim of explored territory. Around its edge, a cluster of red markers blinked steadily. Aurelius cleared his throat. "The signal has been verified," he said. "The transmission received 3 days ago originated from a vessel registered as USV Meridian Star, a member of the original human Vanguard Armada." The room remained silent. One of the younger speakers shifted in his chair. "That fleet was destroyed," he said. Aurelius hesitated. "With respect, Speaker, the evidence suggests otherwise." He expanded the projection. Additional data overlays appeared: gravitational distortions, drive signatures, long-range sensor echoes. There are currently 187 confirmed large-mass objects exiting the Veil corridor, Aurelius continued. Possibly more. Interference from spatial anomalies prevents a precise count. The red markers multiplied across the star map. A ripple of unease moved around the table. "Ships," Speaker Kelleth said quietly. "Yes." "How long until they reach the inner systems?" Aurelius adjusted the map again. "At their current velocity, approximately 13 standard days." Another silence. "Longer this time." Speaker Keleth leaned forward, gray fur along his shoulders bristling with restrained tension. "That is impossible," he said. "Even if a portion of the fleet survived, they would not possess the industrial capacity to maintain that many vessels for 70 years. Unless," another speaker murmured, "they found what we feared they might." The word hung in the air. No one said it aloud. But every person in the room understood. Precursor forges. Ancient factories capable of building warships faster than any modern civilization could match. Speaker Vorin tapped his staff gently against the floor. The sound cut through the room. "We will not speculate," he said. "We will deal with what is in front of us." His pale eyes moved slowly across the gathered council members. "The fleet is returning." A younger speaker spoke before he could stop himself. "Then we stop them." Several heads turned. "Stop them how?" someone asked. "With force." Aurelius gave a nervous laugh before he could catch it. "Speaker, they have already transmitted on every open monitoring channel within range." A new projection appeared above the table. It showed the signal logs. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Then thousands. "The returning fleet is broadcasting continuously," Aurelius said. "Transmission packets include archived communication records, internal conclave directives, and the original council orders issued 73 years ago." The room went still. Someone whispered a quiet curse. "They have the files." "They have everything," Aurelius said. Speaker Vorin closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his expression had hardened into something quiet and deliberate. The human ambassador must not learn of this yet. Several council members looked at him sharply. "Speaker," Keleth said carefully, "if the fleet is already broadcasting—" "Then we still have time," Vorin interrupted. "Time for what?" another asked. Vorin looked up at the star map. The red markers along the veil were slowly moving inward. "They have spent 73 years becoming something we did not anticipate," he said. "And now they are coming home." His voice lowered slightly. "What we must determine before they arrive is whether the conclave is still capable of surviving the consequences of that decision." Around the table, no one answered, because every person in the room understood the truth that had been buried for decades. The greatest threat to the conclave was no longer the fleet returning from the dark. It was the secret that had brought the fleet back in the first place. Director Mara Oae had spent 11 years inside the conclave. Long enough to learn that the most important conversations rarely happened in the rooms designed for them. They happened in pauses. In glances. In the way delegates suddenly became too polite. The morning after Trail brought the archive file, the entire station felt different. Not loudly different. Subtly different. Which was worse. Mara noticed it the moment she stepped into the diplomatic corridor. Two council aides who normally avoided eye contact stopped to greet her. Speaker Keleth, who had not once acknowledged her presence in a hallway during the previous year, asked politely if she had slept well. Even the scheduling office, famous for losing human meeting requests inside bureaucratic delays, confirmed one of her appointments within minutes. Everyone was being helpful. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was lying. Mara returned to her office and closed the door. For a long moment she simply stood there, listening to the faint hum of the station outside. Then she walked to her desk and opened the file Trail had given her. She had already read it 6 times during the night. The transmission logs. The council directives. The quiet, surgical language that had condemned 400,000 explorers to disappear into a region of space no one else would ever reach. And the message. She scrolled down until the final line appeared again. "We are still here. And we remember." Mara exhaled slowly. The council knew. She was certain of that now. The forced politeness in the corridors made it obvious. The question was not whether they knew. The question was how much longer they thought they could keep pretending. Her console chimed. An incoming message appeared on the screen. "Emergency Council consultation, Director Mara Oae requested." Of course. She had been waiting for it. Mara stood, smoothed the sleeves of her dark diplomatic jacket, and walked toward the council chamber. The corridor outside the chamber was empty except for 2 security guards. They opened the doors without speaking. Inside, the council was already seated. 7 speakers sat around the curved stone table. At the center was Voron, the oldest member of the conclave, the last surviving official who had signed the original orders 73 years ago. Mara took the empty chair across from them. No one spoke immediately. Finally, Speaker Kelith pushed a document folder across the table toward her. "We wanted to discuss the situation before unnecessary misunderstandings develop," he said. Mara opened the folder. Inside was a report filled with medical language and psychological terminology. She skimmed the first page. Then the second. Then she closed the folder again. "This is a very careful document," she said. Kelith nodded. "Our scientific teams believe the individuals returning from beyond the veil may have experienced prolonged exposure to unknown energies or precursor artifacts. Such exposure could cause distortions in memory, perception, or—" "Stop." The word landed in the chamber like a dropped blade. Kelith froze. Mara placed both hands flat on the closed folder. "I read this argument already," she said calmly. The room became very quiet. "Not this exact version," she continued, "but the earlier one. The one written 73 years ago." Her eyes moved slowly across the council members. "You called humanity unstable. You said we were unpredictable, too emotional, too ambitious, too dangerous to trust with the technology we found." No one interrupted. Mara leaned back slightly in her chair. "I know what you did," she said. The silence deepened. Speaker Voron studied her carefully. "How long have you known?" he asked. 2 nights. "And you have told no one?" "Not yet." She paused. "Although I suspect that situation will correct itself very soon." Kelith's voice hardened slightly. "Director OAE, we are attempting to prevent a misunderstanding that could destabilize the entire conclave. The returning fleet may believe they were deliberately abandoned, but they were." Kelith stopped speaking. Mara stood. "You left 400,000 people to die in the dark," she said quietly. "You destroyed the beacons that would have guided them home. You watched their families mourn. And then you built memorials to celebrate their bravery." Her voice never rose. It did not need to. When she finished, the chamber felt colder than before. Mara picked up the folder and dropped it back onto the table. "I will not condemn the Vanguard Armada," she said. "I will not stand beside this council while it attempts to explain away what it did." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "One more thing," she added without turning around. "When that fleet arrives, and it will arrive, I will not be standing with you." The chamber remained silent behind her. Mara opened the door and stepped into the corridor. For the first time in 11 years at the conclave, she felt something close to certainty. Somewhere beyond the Kadesh Veil, humanity was already on its way. And when it arrived, the lie that had held the conclave together for 73 years was going to collapse. Forward Monitoring Post 19 sat at the far edge of conclave space. It was not an impressive station. It had no diplomatic halls, no ceremonial chambers, no visiting delegates or political observers. It was a simple installation built for one purpose: watching the empty dark between the stars. 12 crew members lived there. Most of their work involved routine sensor sweeps and relay maintenance. For years, the most exciting thing they had ever detected was a drifting comet. On the 9th day after the council's secret meeting, that changed. Sensor Officer Yevna had just finished her second cup of station coffee when the console in front of her chimed. She frowned and leaned forward. At first she assumed the system was malfunctioning. The long-range sensors had begun registering mass distortions just beyond the edge of the Kadesh Veil. Large ones. Very large ones. The automated tracking system began assigning markers. Contact detected. Yevna watched the count rise. 1, 3, 10. She straightened in her chair. "Command," she called across the small control room, "you need to look at this." The station commander walked over, still adjusting the collar of his uniform. "What is it?" Yevna didn't answer. She simply pointed at the display. The contact count continued climbing. 20, 40, 80. The commander's expression tightened. "Are those ships?" "Yes, sir." The count reached 100. Then it kept going. The main viewport shutters opened automatically as the station turned to align its external cameras with the incoming objects. At first, the darkness beyond the veil looked unchanged. Then the stars began to move. Not the stars themselves. Something in front of them. Ships. Dozens of them. Then hundreds. Ships emerged from the distorted veil one by one, their hulls cutting slowly through the turbulence of warped space like shadows stepping out of deep water. Yevna's console struggled to process the incoming data. 200 contacts, she whispered. The formation expanded as the fleet cleared the distortion boundary. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Most conclave fleets traveled in wide, scattered formations designed for flexibility and long-range engagement. This fleet moved differently. The ships were arranged in layered arcs, each vessel positioned precisely within overlapping fields of support. Every movement synchronized. Every adjustment mirrored across the formation. It looked less like a fleet, and more like a single organism. The ships themselves were unmistakably human in origin. But they had changed. The old Vanguard vessels recorded in historical databases were functional, angular designs. The ships emerging from the veil were larger, heavier. Their hulls carried strange layered structures that wrapped around the original frames like growth rings on an ancient tree. Sensor analysis struggled to classify the materials. Energy readings from their drives were far beyond anything in the Conclave database. At the center of the formation moved the largest ship of all. Twice the length of the original Vanguard flagship. A signal beacon pulsed from its hull. Yevna leaned closer to her display. The identification code appeared slowly as her system decrypted the broadcast. This V Thermopylae. The original flagship. 73 years lost beyond the veil. Still leading the formation. The commander exhaled slowly. Open a communication channel. Yevna nodded and activated the transmitter. Her voice came out steady only because she forced it to. This is Forward Monitoring Post 19 of the Galactic Conclave. Unidentified vessels, you are approaching monitored space. Identify yourselves and state your intentions. For a moment there was only static. Then every communication channel on the station activated at once. Primary frequencies. Emergency frequencies. Civilian channels. Even the decommissioned relay bands that had not been used in decades. The signal flooded all of them simultaneously. A human voice filled the control room. Controlled. This is Fleet Admiral Dar Vasquez, commanding officer of the Vanguard Armada. The room went completely silent. Vasquez continued. We are returning to conclave space after 73 years beyond the Kadesh Veil. Behind her voice, massive data packets began streaming across the station's networks. Yevna watched in stunned silence as the files unpacked themselves across her screen. Transmission logs. Council directives. Historical archives. Evidence. Thousands of documents. The Admiral spoke again. We are aware of the actions taken by the Conclave Council to block our signals and destroy the navigation relays that would have allowed our return. Another pause. We have preserved the records of those actions. The data flood intensified. Across the station, alarms began triggering as the network attempted to process the incoming transmissions. The Admiral's voice remained steady. We are broadcasting those records now on all open frequencies. The commander stared at the screen. You're sending this to the entire network. Yes, Yevna whispered. The Admiral's final words carried a quiet weight that seemed to settle over the room. We are not here to request aid. We are not here to negotiate a misunderstanding. We are here because a crime was committed against our people. The transmission paused. Then the final sentence arrived. We are not asking for justice. We are here to collect it. The signal ended. Outside the viewport, the Vanguard Armada continued its advance. 214 ships moved forward in perfect formation. Unhurried. Unstoppable. Deeper into conclave territory. In the control room of Forward Post 19, no one spoke for several seconds. Then the commander slowly reached for the emergency relay. Alert the inner systems, he said. Yevna nodded and began transmitting. Behind her, the fleet from the dark kept coming. And across the galaxy, the truth the Conclave had buried for 73 years was beginning to spread faster than anyone could stop it. The first place the message reached was a university archive on Terralise Prime. Professor Havek was cataloging trade treaties when his terminal chimed. He almost ignored it. Academic networks were constantly flooded with half-relevant transmissions and unverified historical documents. Most of them were rumors recycled by curious students. But the packet header caught his eye. Vanguard Armada, Primary Archive Release. Havek frowned. That name hadn't appeared in any official Conclave record for decades. He opened the file. For the next 12 minutes he did not move. The documents were precise. Time-stamped. Verified by encryption signatures from the Conclave's own command systems. Navigation beacon shutdown orders. Communication suppression directives. Council authorization codes. The entire record of the decision that had sent 400,000 human explorers into the Kadesh Veil, and quietly ensured they would never return. Havek leaned back in his chair. Then he opened the university's public research channel. And he uploaded everything. Across the galaxy, similar moments began happening. A cargo pilot waiting for departure clearance on Rethan Station opened the broadcast on his ship's receiver and read the files out loud to the entire docking bay. A group of law students on Valori Central downloaded the documents and began cross-referencing them against archived council votes. 3 journalists on the independent news World Kethra verified the encryption signatures within 2 hours and pushed the story onto every open broadcast network they controlled. The Conclave tried to respond. But the systems designed to control information had been built 3 centuries earlier. In a slower age. An age where messages traveled by courier ship. An age where a council order could silence a problem before the public ever heard about it. That world no longer existed. The files spread faster than the suppression teams could track them. Within a day, the truth was everywhere. And the reaction was not quiet. On Kathani Prime, a crowd gathered outside the regional conclave office. Someone had projected the map of the Kadesh Veil onto the side of the government building. The original expedition routes glowed in pale blue lines. Then the navigation beacons appeared, each one marked with the exact moment the Conclave had ordered it destroyed. One by one, the markers turned red. By the time the final beacon disappeared from the map, the crowd had grown silent. No speeches. No chants. Just silence. A silence heavier than any protest. Inside the Conclave itself, the council chamber had become a war room. Speaker Kelith paced the length of the table. They cannot release this information publicly, he snapped. They already have, another council member replied. They are broadcasting it on every open network. Kelith turned toward the central display. The map of Conclave space filled the wall. Across dozens of worlds, small flashing indicators marked regions where demonstrations were forming. Civilian protests. Academic inquiries. Local governments demanding explanations. Kelith's voice hardened. This is exactly why the decision was made in the first place. Speaker Vorin, seated quietly at the end of the table, did not look up. Kelith continued. You all remember the projections. The simulations. Humanity's expansion rate was exponential. Within 2 centuries they would have rivaled every major power in the Conclave. And that justified abandoning them? Another speaker asked. Kelith stopped. It justified protecting galactic stability. A tired voice spoke from the far end of the table. Is it stable now? All eyes turned toward Vorin. The old counselor slowly stood. His age showed in every movement. But his voice remained steady. We told ourselves we were preserving order, he said. We told ourselves the galaxy required limits. He gestured toward the projection of the approaching fleet. And now the civilization we tried to erase is returning stronger than before. No one answered. Because no one had an answer. On Meridian, humanity's diplomatic capital, the news reached Admiral Dar Vasquez shortly after the broadcast spread through the Conclave. She was standing in the command gallery of the USV Thermopylae. The fleet moved silently through deep space around her. 214 ships. Each one carrying the descendants of the explorers who had been abandoned beyond the veil. Her communications officer approached quietly. Admiral, The transmissions worked. Vasquez glanced toward the starfield outside. How widespread? Everywhere. The officer hesitated. The conclave is fracturing. Vasquez nodded slowly. That was always going to happen. She looked back toward the navigation display. The fleet's destination marker blinked at the center of the screen. Conclave Central System, 4 days. Admiral, the officer asked carefully, do you think they'll try to stop us? Vasquez considered the question. For a moment she said nothing. Then she answered calmly. They'll try. She folded her hands behind her back. But the important thing to remember. Her eyes moved to the endless lines of ships moving in formation outside the viewport. Is that they already tried once. And that attempt had created the most determined fleet the galaxy had ever seen. The Vanguard Armada kept moving. For days away now. And every system in the galaxy knew exactly why it was coming. The Vanguard Armada reached the edge of the Conclave's inner defensive perimeter on the 4th day. The system was called Aurelian Gate. For 3 centuries it had served as the primary military checkpoint protecting the core worlds of the Conclave. Every major fleet that entered central space passed through this corridor. Today, every defense platform in the system was active. Orbital weapon arrays rotated slowly in the dark. 43 Conclave warships formed a defensive line between the gate and the advancing human fleet. Their commanders had been given simple orders. Hold position. Prevent unauthorized entry. Avoid engagement if possible. The instructions sounded calm. But the tension inside every bridge in the system was anything but. Commander Relan stood at the forward viewport of the Science Iron Resolve. His cruiser was the largest vessel in the Conclave blockade. Normally that would have been comforting. Today it felt meaningless. Beyond the viewport, the Vanguard Armada approached. Even at extreme distance, the formation was unmistakable. 200 ships moving in perfect coordination. No scattered formations. No defensive hesitation. Just a steady advance toward the heart of Conclave space. Relan had fought in border conflicts. He had commanded fleets against pirates and insurgents. But this was different. This fleet did not behave like an invading force. Invaders broadcast threats. They demanded surrender. They maneuvered aggressively. The Vanguard Armada simply kept moving, as if nothing in the galaxy had the authority to stop it. Relan turned toward the communications officer. Open a channel. The signal went out immediately. Vanguard Armada, this is Commander Relan of the Conclave Defense Fleet. You are entering restricted space. State your intentions. For a moment there was silence. Then the reply arrived. The same calm voice that had broadcast across the galaxy days earlier. Fleet Admiral Dar Vasquez. Commander Relan, she said, her tone steady and almost conversational, thank you for responding. Relan frowned slightly. That was not the tone of someone expecting a battle. You are approaching the central systems of the Conclave, he said carefully. This region is under active defense authority. We are aware. Then you understand that your fleet cannot proceed without Council authorization. There was a brief pause. When Vasquez spoke again, her voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided the outcome. We are not requesting authorization. Around Relan, the bridge crew shifted uneasily. He forced his voice to remain professional. Admiral, I have orders to prevent your fleet from advancing further. Yes, Vasquez replied calmly. I assumed you might. Relan waited. He expected a threat. A warning. Perhaps even a demand for surrender. Instead Vasquez said something unexpected. Commander, I recommend you move your ships. The bridge fell silent. Relan blinked. I'm sorry. You are currently positioned directly along our flight path. Relan's jaw tightened. Admiral, that sounds dangerously close to a threat. No, she said gently. It's a courtesy. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then Relan glanced at the tactical display. The human fleet was still moving. Still maintaining formation. Still heading directly toward the defensive line. They're not slowing down, the sensor officer whispered. Relan felt the weight of 43 ships and thousands of lives under his command. He knew what the council expected. Stand firm. Show strength. Demonstrate that the conclave still controlled its own space. But he also knew something else. He had been reading the broadcasts, the files, the records, the truth of what had happened 73 years ago. And now the descendants of the people abandoned in the dark were coming home. Rilan opened the channel again. Admiral Vasquez, he said slowly, if you continue on your current course, you will force an engagement. The response came immediately. No, she said. We won't. Rilan frowned. What does that mean? Another pause. Then Vasquez answered. Commander, you are mistaking our objective. The tactical display shifted. New signals appeared across the system. Not weapons. Not attack patterns. Broadcasts. Dozens of them. Human ships transmitting openly to every vessel in the Conclave defensive line. Historical records. Council directives. The original orders to destroy the Vanguard navigation beacons. Rilan watched as the files began appearing on the consoles of every ship in the defense fleet. The entire defensive line had just received the evidence. Vasquez spoke one final time. We did not come here to fight the Conclave Navy. We came here to confront the people who gave the orders. Her voice softened slightly. You and your crews were not responsible for what happened. The tactical officer whispered. Commander, several ships are standing down. Rilan looked at the display. One by one, the warships in the defensive line were powering down their weapon systems. Not retreating. Just refusing to fire. He felt something unexpected. Relief. Rilan exhaled slowly. Then he gave the order. All ships, clear the corridor. The conclave blockade parted. 43 warships drifting slowly aside as the Vanguard Armada passed between them. No weapons fired. No battle fought. 214 human ships continued toward the central systems. Commander Rilan watched them disappear into the starfield. And for the first time since the crisis began, he realized something important. The Conclave had expected a war. But humanity had arrived with something far more dangerous. The truth, the Conclave central system had never seen a fleet like this. From orbit, the capital world of Veridon looked peaceful. Silver oceans reflected the system's pale star. Towering cities glittered along the continents. Thousands of civilian ships moved calmly through the orbital traffic lanes that surrounded the planet. For centuries, Veridon had been the quiet center of galactic power. Today, every observatory, every orbital sensor platform, every civilian telescope pointed toward the same place. The dark beyond the outer defense ring. Because something enormous was arriving. Inside the Conclave's Grand Assembly Hall, the council was already in session. But the chamber did not feel like a place of governance anymore. It felt like a waiting room. Hundreds of delegates from member civilizations filled the tiered seats surrounding the circular chamber floor. No one was speaking. No one was arguing. All eyes were fixed on the massive holographic display floating above the chamber. The display showed the approach of the Vanguard Armada. 214 ships moving through the defensive perimeter. The defense fleets had not fired. The blockade had not resisted. The corridor had simply opened. Speaker Kelith stared at the display as if it might change if he looked long enough. They should have stopped them, he said quietly. No one answered. Because everyone in the chamber had already seen the broadcasts. They had read the files. They knew why the fleet had come. At the center of the council table, Speaker Vorin sat motionless. The old counselor looked smaller than he had a week ago. The weight he had carried for 73 years was finally visible to everyone. Kelith turned toward him sharply. You signed the order, he said. Vorin nodded once. Yes. You told us the expedition was a threat to stability. I believed it was. Kelith gestured toward the holographic fleet. And now they're here. Yes. Kelith's voice rose slightly. Then what do we do? Vorin looked up at the display. The ships were still moving. Slow. Deliberate. Unstoppable. Finally, he answered. We face them. Above the capital world, the Vanguard Armada slowed. The formation expanded into a wide orbital arc. Ships positioned themselves with precise mathematical spacing around the planet. Not an attack pattern. More like a silent audience. The flagship USV Thermopylae moved forward alone. A communication request appeared on every conclave system simultaneously. Direct address request, Fleet Admiral Dar Vasquez. The request was not encrypted. It was not restricted to military channels. It was broadcast to the entire planet. To every civilian receiver. Every government console. Every public display. Speaker Voron closed his eyes briefly. Then he gave the order. Open the channel. Admiral Dar Vasquez appeared on the chamber display. The hall went completely silent. She looked older than the historical images in conclave archives. Her dark hair had turned silver at the edges. The lines on her face were deeper. But her eyes were steady. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the entire chamber. Across the entire planet. Members of the conclave, she said calmly. My name is Dar Vasquez. I command the fleet you see in orbit above your world. She paused briefly. For 73 years, my people lived beyond the Kadesh Veil. For 73 years, we survived in a region of space that your council believed would destroy us. Behind her, the bridge of the Thermopylae was visible. Officers moved quietly at their stations. No tension. No panic. Just calm efficiency. Vasquez continued. When our expedition departed, we believed we were explorers. We believed we were partners in the conclave's shared future. Her eyes moved slightly toward the council chamber camera. But your council made a different decision. The holographic display behind her shifted. The archived orders appeared. Navigation beacon destruction commands. Signal suppression directives. The signatures of the council members who had authorized them. A quiet murmur spread through the assembly hall. Vasquez let the silence settle. Then she spoke again. You left us in the dark. You expected us to disappear. Another pause. But we didn't. The display behind her changed again. Images from beyond the veil appeared. New human cities. Shipyards. Colonies. Massive orbital stations. The result of 73 years of survival. 73 years of building. We adapted, Vasquez said. We learned. And eventually, her gaze returned to the chamber. We found our way home. The assembly hall remained completely silent. No one interrupted. No one dared. Vasquez's final words came slowly. We are not here for revenge. Several council members visibly relaxed. Then she finished the sentence. We are here for accountability. The room froze. She continued. The conclave taught the galaxy that power justified authority. That strength gave you the right to decide the fate of others. Her voice sharpened slightly. But your strength failed. The display behind her showed the Vanguard Armada surrounding the capital world. 214 ships. Unbroken. Now the galaxy knows the truth, she said. So the question before this council is very simple. Her eyes focused directly on Speaker Voron. What happens next? The entire conclave waited. For the first time in 3 centuries, the rulers of the galaxy were no longer in control of the outcome. For several seconds after Admiral Vasquez finished speaking, the Grand Assembly Hall remained completely silent. Not the quiet of calm diplomacy. The quiet of history changing. Hundreds of delegates sat frozen in their seats. Across the chamber, representatives from civilizations that had trusted the conclave for centuries stared at the evidence floating in the air above them. The destroyed navigation beacons. The abandoned expedition. The fleet that had survived anyway. At the center of the chamber, Speaker Voron slowly stood. The movement was small. But every camera in the hall turned toward him. For 73 years he had carried the secret of the Vanguard decision. For 73 years he had believed that secret would die with him. Now the entire galaxy was watching. Voron leaned slightly on his staff. When he spoke, his voice was tired but clear. Admiral Vasquez, he said, the conclave cannot undo what was done. Vasquez did not interrupt. We cannot return the lives lost in the veil, Voron continued. We cannot erase the decision that was made. He looked around the assembly chamber. Many of the council members avoided his gaze. Others watched him carefully, waiting. Vorin turned back toward the display. But the responsibility for that decision is mine. A ripple moved through the hall. Kelith turned sharply toward him. Speaker! Vorin raised a hand. No. He looked at the other council members. You know it is true. Silence answered him. Because every one of them remembered the vote. And the fear that had shaped it. Vorin continued. The conclave believed humanity represented instability. He paused. We feared what you might become. His eyes lifted to the projection of the human fleet. And so we tried to remove you from the equation. The words sounded heavier when spoken aloud. 73 years of quiet justification collapsed into one simple truth. We were wrong. The chamber erupted. Delegates began speaking at once. Some shouting. Some demanding explanations. Some simply staring in disbelief. But Vorin was not finished. He tapped his staff once against the floor. The sound echoed sharply through the chamber. Gradually, the noise faded. The conclave has ruled this galaxy for 3 centuries, Vorin said. It has done so under the assumption that strength grants authority. His voice hardened slightly. That assumption is now proven false. He turned toward the other council members. The council will dissolve. The room went silent again. Kelith's chair scraped across the floor as he stood. You cannot do that, he snapped. Vorin looked at him calmly. Watch me. He faced the chamber. The conclave council will step down immediately. A new interstellar assembly will be formed. One where no civilization has the authority to erase another. His eyes moved across the delegates. And where decisions that affect the entire galaxy cannot be hidden behind secrecy and fear. The words settled slowly across the hall. It was not just an apology. It was the end of an era. Vorin turned back toward the display. Toward Admiral Vasquez. The future of this galaxy must include humanity, he said quietly. If you are willing. For the first time since the transmission began, Vasquez looked slightly surprised. Not shocked, but thoughtful. She glanced briefly at the officers around her on the Thermopylae bridge. Then she looked back at the chamber. Speaker Vorin, she said slowly, humanity did not return here to rule. She paused. We returned because the truth matters. Another moment passed. And because the future should belong to everyone who builds it. She nodded once. We will participate. Across the chamber, the tension that had gripped the delegates began to loosen. Not relief, but something close. Hours later, the Vanguard Armada began moving again. Not away from the capital world, but outward. Human ships spread slowly across the system. Some docking at civilian stations. Some opening diplomatic channels. Some simply drifting peacefully in orbit. Not conquerors. Just neighbors. On a maintenance platform near one of the orbital shipyards, Dara Okafor wiped grease from her hands and glanced up at the sky. Through the station's transparent dome, she could see them. Hundreds of ships. Human ships. Ships that had crossed the darkness beyond the veil and returned stronger than anyone expected. Her console chimed softly. A news alert appeared on the screen. Conclave Council resigns. New Galactic Assembly to be formed. Dara read the headline. Then she smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Just a quiet one. The kind people make when something complicated finally resolves itself. She set the tool back into the repair kit and went back to work on the coolant system. Because ships still needed fixing. People still needed food. Life still needed building. Above her, the Vanguard Armada hung silently in orbit. Not as a threat. Not as conquerors. But as proof of something the entire galaxy was finally beginning to understand. You could try to erase people from the map. You could try to bury the truth. You could even abandon them in the darkest part of the universe. But if they refused to disappear, eventually they would come back. And when they did, the stars themselves would have to make room.